Hey, this is Brian.
And Shelby.
And you're listening to the Hyperspace
Pod Blast. Aren't you a little short for a podcast?
Huh?
Hi. Welcome back to Hyperspace Pod Blast.
I can't tell if that was original or are you making fun of me?
Yes.
Okay, fair. You're originally making fun of me.
And best.
Nice esoteric joke there.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, gang. Welcome in to Last Shot Chapter Chats Part 2. This time we have a slightly different crew together, so we're going to go ahead and do introductions right now, starting with Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess Hagen, and you could find me on Twitter. I'm at Ozarks_Jess.
Jorgie.
Hi, I'm Jorgie. You can find me on Twitter at SW_rules.
True. And what's your other one?
My other one is Artsy Jorgie.
Attaboy. And then finally, our new recruit this week is Connie.
Hi, I'm Connie, and you can find me on Twitter at Connie She, and that's last name is SHIH on Connie She on Twitter.
Excellent. So that is our crew, and we're going to bombard them immediately with a really deep, thought-provoking question, which is, what do you think of the social commentary in the novel? Is it too on the nose, not obvious enough, or just right? Do you think it's preaching to the choir as far as the majority of Star Wars fans that tend to read the novels goes? Or do you think it has the potential to get people to think about the issues at hand? So, Jess, what is your glorious answer?
It was either not obvious enough or just right, because I didn't really notice any social commentary. So either it hit that sweet spot where it just soaked in, or I was too dense to catch it.
I doubt that was it. It must just, sometimes with stories, I think you're so into the narrative that you don't notice. So that helps. And sometimes that's, a glowing review of the book itself. But I don't know. What of it that was just right did you happen to notice? Or was it just kind of general things?
It was just kind of general things. I just was absorbing it as I was reading it.
Right on. That was it. That was much more of a low, soft pitch than I thought it was going to be. So let's see what Jorgie thought.
I thought it is kind of preaching to the choir because, or at least from interactions I see and have on Twitter, it seems like most of us kind of get it, but sometimes I think there are some people who could benefit from some of the social commentary, like Aero, that the Gungan, that part made me laugh so hard because he was just roasting Han, and it was true, but maybe it was a little much for some people, but it was really funny to me, and I thought it was kind of necessary. And then I thought maybe I was being kind of speciesist, because at first I was like, how could a Gungan not have an accent? But why would I think that? So it kind of also gave me a different viewpoint in a way as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things that I brought up the first time we tried to record this is our area, Jorgie will know, there's a lot of people here that are brown. And the first thing a lot of white people will assume when they see them is that they are Mexican. Not just Spanish speaking, but specifically Mexican. Yeah. And they'll make some sort of, and it might be like Han did. Like Han was trying to, blend in with the guy. He wasn't being overtly racist, but you'll have that kind of try to say something Mexican. The person's like, I'm Californian and my family's Puerto Rican. You really missed the mark there completely, but whatever. That's kind of where I was at with that one. Until Arrow said bro, and then my eyes rolled so far in the back of my head that I had to hit myself to get them to come back. But that's neither here nor there. So Connie, what'd you think?
Well, like Jess, I thought it was, for me it was just right, because I couldn't tell when it was first, when I was first getting into the part 2 that anything was going on until I finished the whole part, and then I kind of reflected back, and I was wondering about, especially the species, what it says about the species, particularly the Gungans and the Ewoks, because I guess the phrase that comes to my mind is, don't judge a book by its cover, because when as a fandom, when we talk about the Gungans and the Ewoks, part of the fandom I think has not so great view on the Gungans, especially if you look towards like the prequels, and we were first introduced to the Gungans via Jar Jar Binks, and then when we meet Aru, it was surprising that he's in charge of security and can help Han and Lando and everybody escape and everything. So I think that was surprising to me at the first part, because I was assuming the Gungans were what we knew of them in the prequels. So I got to see a different side of them, at least from my perspective, and the Ewoks too. Yeah. Because we only got our impression about the Ewoks to the Return of the Jedi, and also I guess a little bit in the other novels like Aftermath and stuff, but we never really had an interaction, or at least I can remember, we never really had an interaction with the Ewoks. So when we were introduced to Peapod, and she really is a slicer and everything, and she helps, that's a different side to the Ewoks that we haven't seen before. So I think the commentary was just right in. It struck me as very self-aware. Maybe self-aware as far as, maybe, I don't know if it's reacting to fandom's impressions of them or whatnot, but I just thought it was just right. And as far as preaching to the choir, I'm not sure about that, but those are just some things I noticed about the species.
Yeah, the thing that I noticed a lot was the kind of droids' rights stuff. So, I don't know. I mean, I think that probably if you take the subset of Star Wars fans and then people who are also reading the books, if you kind of whittle that down, I think that most likely the people who are reading Star Wars books, probably this is somewhat preaching to the choir. But I think that, there's going to be people who are reading this that, this is kind of a revelation for them in a lot of different ways. No one knows everything or has ever completely overcome all of their implicit bias. So yeah. I think we could all learn no matter what. But I thought the droids' rights was it was a little strange, but I guess that's kind of some conversations that we've been having with a lot of different pop culture stuff, like with Blade Runner 2049. It kind of goes into that same vein. So I thought it was pretty good overall.
Yeah, the only thing I struggle with the whole droids' rights thing is we have nothing really to compare it to in our reality yet. I mean, it could be something exactly. As Dave pointed out, in Japan, they're having a labor crisis because their population is actually declining. So this whole idea of robotics and AI becoming a real part of everyday life is something that they're, staring at as something that's gonna happen, not kind of if, but when. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes about in the future. But like I said, for me personally, it's kind of hard to see where that relates to the real world. But definitely the Gungans, like the whole idea, like you said, of these species not being, don't judge a book by its cover is a really good point.
Okay, so moving on to our next question, what do you think of the juxtaposition of Lando seeming to finally decide to settle down while Han and Leia's relationship, some would argue, appears to be on its downward spiral?
I really liked it from a storytelling point of view to see those two things going in opposite directions. I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking to me to see Han and Leia and to hear Han's internal struggles with how he just doesn't know how to be a dad, and it's really hard, but I enjoy seeing the differences between Han and Lando and where they stand at the same point in time.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely, it's a side of Lando I didn't expect to see, actually.
Totally, yeah.
If someone would have handed me this book and been like, hey, Lando's gonna find a girl and try to settle down, I'd be like, oh, what fan fiction is this? But yeah, it was pretty cool. I like the way it was done, how it echoed back to a past relationship, that one person that he's kind of always had in the back of his mind. It's kind of the only way I could really see Lando having a settle down moment, I guess. What do you think, Jorgie?
I kind of agree with Jess that from a story perspective, it's kind of interesting, or it really works. But at the same time, I want Han and Leia to be happy for 10 years or 11 years before the spiral starts, so they can just have a bunch of adorable family adventures with their son. So it's kind of heartbreaking from that point of view. but I think it kind of fit the story the way Daniel wrote it.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because when we were talking with Soph about this, she and I both felt like right now I don't view this as Han and Leia's relationship declining. I think it kind of shows how strong it is, where Leia kind of just understands Han on that level of understanding that he needs to go do this. And I don't know, I guess whenever they are talking via hologram, the understanding that you can see from Leia and Han of each other and just how they kind of work that way. I don't know. To me, I don't see it as a downward spiral.
Right.
Not yet.
Yeah. I don't think that so far it feels like a downward spiral, but I'm not sure exactly how that might or might not change in the rest of this novel, or how that might affect the relationship going forward, like if this kind of stuff happens often or not with the both of them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's the way the relationship, in my mind, kind of goes downhill is a very, very slow chipping away.
I hope so.
It's the little things. It's Han's sort of anxiety about being a father, the idea that, at least in my mind, it's not really something he ever saw for himself, so he never took the time to wrap his mind around it, and now he feels kind of lost. And it's an extra way of being tied down. Like, not only is he married, but now he's married with children. He's got like shackles on both legs, and that's just not a Han Solo thing. So I think that's the point where he's starting to realize that, and this is his first taste of, I think, getting away and feeling that adventure since he's been a father, and he's kind of like, oh yeah, I like this. And maybe that's where things start to, the layers of the onion start to peel, so to speak. But what do you think, Connie?
Just to jump off what you said about Han and being a father, didn't he kind of reflect upon that, or didn't he talk to Lando about that? Because I thought that it was a conversation or some kind of reflection that he thought to himself that he wasn't ready. He couldn't believe that he was in this position with married and had a 2-year-old. But that maybe that's just me remembering, but I thought it was echoed in the book somewhere.
I think they talk about it, which I thought was interesting too, because it's really good to actually see that, because you know, a lot of times everyone just assumes like, oh, you are a parent and now you know everything and everything's wonderful and la 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 la. But to have like the apprehensions and being scared and conveying that in this book, I think is really important. And to show that, you know, maybe this wasn't what he thought he wanted, but now he has a kid, and it doesn't mean he doesn't love the kid. It's just that
I think he's struggling to find his place, because I remember what struck me was particularly with Han, and not so much Han and Leia, but Han and Ben. I guess with Ben just being, I mean, even with being a 2-year-old, he was thinking about, he even remarked to Lando or somebody that he noticed that Ben was upset when he was there, and Ben was upset when he's gone. So he couldn't really figure out his place. And then when he was talking to Leia over the hologram, and then Ben was trying to, Ben realized he wasn't there.
That part was so cute.
Yeah, that part was cute. So. But it just struck me as then, even at such a young age, how that was starting to, you could see hints of it, like Brian said. But it's not quite there yet, but the layers of the onion are beginning to peel. So I thought that was real striking. As far as Lando is concerned, I really enjoyed seeing that side of Lando, but I was really struck about how intimate it was in this book. Because when he was talking about his, on again, off again relationship, I never really seen that aspect in a Star Wars novel before. But I really enjoyed seeing that, and I know it really struck me. Well, as far as Lando is concerned, as somebody who would want to settle down, but just to see him interact with that old man on Chandrila, and he was trying to sort out his feelings and things, it was a different side to him that I certainly enjoyed seeing. So I think it was the juxtaposition. It's really good from a narrative standpoint. So I'm curious to see how it goes later on in the book, but up until this point, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I would say I would say the same. It's an interesting side of Lando that works, even though I would never have guessed that it would. So kudos to the writer.
Yeah.
Moving on. How do you find the writing, speaking of? As you get further into the heart of the story, we remarked on the first episode that it was very much in the characters' voices, but taking it from a specific Star Wars lens, is it hitting those right notes still? Is it trying too hard, or is it somewhere in between? Jess?
I think it's hitting the right notes. I mean, it's got that Star Wars blend of stuff happening in space and stuff happening in a more terrestrial location. And in general, the tone is pretty much on for Star Wars. There's not very many things that have really thrown me out of it. I think it's been doing a really good job.
Right on. Yeah. Are you still hearing the characters' dialogue and their character voices?
I am. I'm really digging it. I like it.
Excellent. Jorgie?
No, I think it's hitting the right notes. For me, Star Wars doesn't really have a specific feel. As long as a writer gets like the state of the galaxy right and like the technology right, I don't care like what they do. And I think the author does it really well. Like he gets Star Wars, quote unquote. But sometimes I think his writing is a little, the dialogue of the characters is a little too like, I don't know how you call it, like modern, I guess, like what teenagers would say.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Aero, when he's talking to Han, he's like, bro, don't even,
I know.
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah. And like, I don't think it really works because Star Wars has had stories told in it for like 40 years, so our language kind of changes. So if we kind of add our modern languages, or the way we speak now, in the future it would get kind of jarring if we have a story taking place at the same time and we kind of just insert current dialect into it.
Yeah, I would be much happier if they would have used like weird 70s slang instead of our modern type, you know? If he would have been like, what are you talking about, my main man? That doesn't jive, daddy. I would have been like, okay, I can see this being Star Wars. That bro was just, that shook me. And then, like I said last time, the whole haven't seen you in a minute thing.
That came to mind.
Yeah, there was a couple of things that I've been pretty cringy about. At one point, and I guess it kind of goes into what Connie was saying with the sort of romance element about the way Lando's sort of noticing things about women was kind of like, this isn't kind of really Star Warsy, but whatever. It wasn't terrible. But he does refer to, I think it's Kasha or Kesha, whatever the Twi'lek's name is drooling at one point, and he thinks that it's icky. And I was just thinking to myself, I don't think icky is in Lando's vocabulary, like even his inner monologue vocabulary. But anyway, that's just me and my continued pickiness from last episode. But Connie, what do you think?
Well, overall, I thought part 2 I was able to get into the story better, because I know it took me a while to get into the book when I was reading part 1, because the shifting of the time periods and all the flashbacks from planet to planet, that it took me a little while to get into the rhythm of the book. But once we hit part 2, I was able to get into more of the, the heart of the story. And I guess in terms of the Star Wars, I did feel like it was in the Star Wars universe, particularly because I'm reading the novel and I have the audiobook, so I'm listening to the audio with it. And the audio has the benefit of having the narrators, and also at some points they have the music soundtrack sometimes coming in points. So that adds to the quality of the audiobook. So I guess that helps me get into the story more. So I in terms of the story, I thought it hit the right notes for me. But I also agree with your point, Brian, in that in Jorgie, there's some points of the dialogue where it says bro, or just some words that really kind of take me out of it for a second and bring me into the real world, I guess our world, and not in the galaxy far away that we know it. So, and that annoys me a little bit, but that's just here and there little points. But overall, I think as we get into part 2, for me, I'm getting more into the story. I'm beginning to connect the pieces more.
So what do you think of the inclusion of creatures in the novel? Do you now want your own pet wart? And what about the rumor of the awful creatures lurking in the bowels of the prison being true, and the blaster fire eating forosnags? Jess?
I love creatures in Star Wars. I think it's kind of what makes Star Wars Star Wars. Like, Star Trek has tribbles and that's about it. Like, and Star Wars just has creatures everywhere and it's just part of the world. I love it.
Exactly.
I'm not really a wart kind of person. I'd much rather have like a Tuca cat give me a cuddly animal. But it's fun to just have these creatures pop up. I mean, as far as the blaster eating ones, I was just like, really? That was a little weird to me, but it's Star Wars, like, I'll take it.
Right. Yeah. I think it was Soph that said that on our first go around that a wart isn't exactly what she would choose for a spacefaring vehicle companion, but to each their own.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm with you with creatures all the way. Anyone who's listened or read anything of mine knows that I'm head over heels for the creatures, and it's for the same reasons that you mentioned. It makes the world fuller and seem more real. And I was actually 100% on board with you with the 4-0 snags. I was like, oh, they eat blaster fire. That's convenient. And then I thought, well, in a world where you can clone people and you have all this bioengineering, of course there's creatures that eat blaster fire. That makes perfect sense. Who wouldn't do that for guard dogs? Like, that's genius. So after a little letting go, I was able to embrace that one. And I did like the idea of the weird, like, hypnotic, I call them lobstrosities. That's what it reminded me of from the Dark Tower novels. They didn't have mind control powers, but that's what I saw in my head when they were being chased in the bottom there. It was very cool. It was very, like, Indiana Jones meets Star Wars-y, which synced up really well since I kept imagining Harrison Ford. So it was all good. It was all good. What do you think, Jorgie?
I just want to touch on what you said about the 4-0 snags. I mean, it is an Imperial prison, so maybe, like, the Tarkin Initiative made that so that, like, prisoners couldn't escape or something, even if they got their hands on blaster. I don't know. That just came to mind. Right. But I definitely don't want a pet wart. I Googled it the other day, and I was like, no thanks. Yeah, they're pretty ugly. And as far as the other creatures go, I don't really mind. I mean, I really like the Loth Wolves and what they could do in Rebels and the War Between Worlds. So if I like those, it's kind of hard for me to, like, dislike some weird stuff.
True. And it's hard for you to dislike anything, honestly. Let's just be real about
That's
it.
That's not true. Okay, it's true.
All right, Connie, what do you think?
I really love the inclusion of creatures because, echoing what you all said, they're the one thing that makes Star Wars Star Wars. And I think they fit right into the galaxy. Personally, I much prefer, like, the furry creatures, like the love cats. And all these creatures seem to be very slimy and underworldy and things. But they reminded me of, like, they fit right in with the Rancors, the Raftars, and the other creatures in the Star Wars galaxy. So they fit right in that point. In terms of the creatures lurking in the bowels of the prison, I think that when I was reading that reminded me, for some reason, that reminded me of the Balrog from the Fellowship of the Ring. I guess because I thought of this mythical creature in the dungeon, so that came to mind for me. In terms of, I thought the blaster eating, first of all, when I first read about the blaster eating for snags, I thought that was a bit much, but then I thought that was really. I said, "Why not?" I mean, it's one of the things. I mean, you would have a creature like that. So after a while, I got used to it. But at first, it was a little bit too on the nose for me. So
right on. Kind of like that kid on the playground where you're like, pew pew, hey, I got you, and he's like, no, I've laser-proof armor. It's like, okay, sure you do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, like I said before, I got around it, and I enjoy it.
It's a big galaxy.
Exactly.
There's got to be one of everything.
Exactly.
That's what I really like.
Yeah.
Like how there's a lot of bugs in real life. There's just, like, a ton of creatures that are, like, so different.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point, yeah. There's probably a creature out there that could eat blaster fire if we had such a thing.
Yeah. Those prison creatures remind me of sirens too. I guess if you look at Greek mythology, of course they're not, pretty by any means, but they're like, I guess the way they're hypnotic, it reminded me of those
I agree.
creatures.
Those might have been my favorites, I think. I really enjoyed the creatures in this book.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a very, very cool addition. It'll be neat to see if they ever pop back up at any time or if they're in Solo. And speaking of Solo, with it right around the corner, and I mean, like, literally, we're going to see it tomorrow. I'm sure most of you will see it by the time the weekend's over.
23 hours from now.
Yeah. Do you feel like the novel at this point, obviously, some of you might be finished with it. We're not finished. We're kind of staying to where we are in our chapter chat so we don't spoil ourselves or something. I don't know. But do you feel like the novel will improve your viewing experience, detract from it, or make no difference?
I don't think it's going to have like a huge impact on my viewing experience, but I do enjoy reading the book ahead of time and having a frame of reference for where Lando and L3 are at one point in their history around the time the movie happens. Like, just having a little more information than the average moviegoer, but not so much that I feel like it's going to inhibit what I'm watching.
Right on. I think that's probably pretty accurate. Go ahead, Jorgie.
For me, in the past, when I would read Catalyst or Princess of Alderaan, it didn't really, I guess, make the movie better or anything, but it improved the experience. For example, I got so attached to Galen, Lyra, and Krennic, so the second they were on screen, I was like, because I just liked them so much. And same thing with Holdo, because Holdo was awesome in Princess of Alderaan. So it just made it more special when they were on screen, and I feel like the same thing's going to happen with L3, where I don't even need an introduction. It's just, she's on screen, and I'm like, yes, queen.
Yeah, I would say that L3 is going to be the big winner as far as getting a reaction out of Last Shot. I have a feeling most of the other characters probably won't even play into the story. So I don't think it's going to be either here or there, really. What do you think?
I think it will enhance my experience, particularly with L3. I guess, like you said, she's probably one of the only characters that would kind of make a connection between the novel and what we've seen from the trailers so far. So I guess with that, it'll definitely enhance my experience. Like Jorgie, when I read like Catalyst and I read the backstory, it really gave me appreciation more for Galen and Lyra and Krennic. So I think that will happen with me, like a similar experience. But in terms of, I don't think it'll make a big difference, but I think it'll give me more appreciation of the droid.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those things where it's not necessary to understand the story, but it definitely enhances your enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I think Catalyst is almost required for Rogue One, in my opinion, just because what they do with Galen and Lyra especially is so little that to get any sort of idea about those two characters, you really have to read the book. It's not that important, but I think it adds a lot. I really don't think Last Shot is going to have that same effect, though. I think it's going to be like, oh, cool, I know this character a little better. But aside from that, I think it's just another one of those fun, unnecessary Star Wars stories, right, Jorgie?
Oh my gosh.
Thanks, guys, so much for coming on the podcast today. We really appreciate your thoughts. And if you guys want to join the conversation, be sure to hit us up on Twitter at hyperspace_pod.
Email us at hyperspacepodblast@gmail.com.
And check out our content on hyperspacepodblast.com.
And if, like Connie, you would like to get your hands on that Last Shot audiobook, go to www.audibletrial.com/hyperspace for a free audiobook and 30-day trial of Audible.
All right, talk to you later, guys. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye!